The self-storage facility had been part of the neighborhood for 15 years. 3-story building, climate-controlled units, standard security. Located in a mixed residential and light commercial district where families lived in apartments and townhouses within 2 blocks in every direction. Storage facilities were common in urban areas. This one seemed no different from dozens of others. But ATF investigators had been tracking weapons theft from military installations across 3 states. Over the past 14 months, inventory discrepancies at armories and supply depots indicated systematic diversion of firearms, ammunition, and equipment. Not random theft, organized procurement. Specific weapons were targeted. Serialized items were replaced with non-functional replicas to delay detection. The operation showed planning and insider access. The breakthrough came from financial intelligence. A storage facility employee had made cash deposits inconsistent with his declared income. Bank records showed patterns suggesting he was being paid by someone beyond his legitimate employer. Surveillance revealed his role. He provided after-hours access to specific storage units, disabled security cameras during certain time windows, and falsified access logs to hide unauthorized entries. Federal investigators cross-referenced the storage facility's rental records against known associates of arms trafficking networks. One unit was rented under a shell company with ties to overseas buyers of military equipment. The rental had been active for 11 months. Payment was always cash. No one had been observed accessing the unit during normal business hours. Undercover surveillance confirmed suspicious activity. Vehicles arriving late at night. Multiple individuals entering through a service entrance. The employee providing access would disable cameras, allow entry, then restore systems after departure. The pattern repeated every 10 to 14 days. The timing suggested inventory rotation. Materials brought in, stored temporarily, then moved for distribution. Thermal imaging from aerial surveillance showed unusual heat signatures in the building. Most storage units showed ambient temperature, but 3 units on the second floor registered differently. The climate control was set much colder than normal, suggesting the contents required environmental stability. Weapons and ammunition required specific storage conditions to prevent degradation. The thermal profile matched what investigators expected for a significant arsenal. The tactical challenge was the location. The storage facility sat in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Apartment buildings within 50 yards, townhouses across the street, a daycare center 2 blocks away, an elementary school 4 blocks distant. Any confrontation involving weapons fire or explosives could endanger hundreds of civilians. The investigation needed to move carefully. Federal warrants were obtained for the storage facility and the specific units under suspicion. But intelligence gathering continued. How many people would be on site during a raid? What security measures protected the weapons cache? Were the units booby-trapped? Was there a quick reaction force ready to respond to any breach attempt? Electronic surveillance provided critical information. Communications intercepts revealed a planned transaction. The weapons were scheduled for transfer within 72 hours. A buyer was arriving from overseas. The transfer would involve moving the entire inventory to a secondary location for inspection and payment. Once transferred, the weapons would be loaded into shipping containers and sent to conflict zones where they would be used by terrorist organizations and insurgent groups. The timing created urgency. The raid needed to happen before the transfer. Once the weapons left the storage facility, tracking would become nearly impossible. The arsenal would disappear into international arms markets. Weapons stolen from American military installations would be used against American interests and innocent civilians in foreign conflicts. The tactical briefing involved multiple agencies. ATF led the investigation. FBI provided counterterrorism expertise. Local SWAT teams would execute the entry. Explosive ordnance disposal specialists prepared for potential booby traps. Evacuation coordinators planned civilian safety protocols for the surrounding neighborhood. The plan was comprehensive. The raid would occur at dawn, early enough to catch any occupants off guard, but late enough that most residents would be awake and able to evacuate if necessary. The storage facility would be secured from all entrances. The specific units would be breached using methods that minimized risk of detonating any explosive devices that might be present. Civilian safety was paramount. The apartment buildings within blast radius were identified. Evacuation routes were planned. Emergency shelters were prepared. Local police coordinated with building managers to facilitate rapid notification and movement of residents if the situation required it. The warrant was executed at 5:30 in the morning. Tactical teams surrounded the storage facility. All exits were secured. The employee providing illicit access was arrested at his home simultaneously to prevent any warning to the criminal network. Within minutes, the facility was isolated. The entry began with the main office. Facility managers were detained and moved to a secure area. Building schematics were obtained. Security systems were taken over to prevent remote monitoring. The facility was now completely under law enforcement control. The tactical team advanced to the second floor. 3 units were targeted, all rented under the shell company, all showing unusual thermal signatures, all suspected of containing the weapons cache. The first unit's door was breached using a hydraulic spreader. The lock mechanism gave way. The door opened. Inside was a small arsenal. Rifles stacked in organized rows, handguns in sealed containers, ammunition boxes labeled with military markings. But the quantity was limited, perhaps 50 weapons total. Significant, but not matching the scale of thefts documented across multiple installations. The second unit was opened. More weapons, heavier caliber, machine guns, grenade launchers, anti-tank weapons, military-grade equipment that never should have been in civilian hands. But again, quantities didn't match expectations. Maybe another 100 weapons. Concerning, but not catastrophic. The third unit changed everything. The door was breached. The space was different, larger than the other units, and it wasn't just a storage room. The back wall was false. Behind it was an opening leading to an expanded area that shouldn't exist according to building plans. The tactical team advanced carefully. Beyond the false wall was a warehouse space created by removing walls between multiple units. The area extended across what should have been 6 separate storage rooms. And it was filled. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Weapons, over 2,000 rifles, 800 handguns, 50 machine guns, crates of grenades, anti-tank missiles, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft weapons, ammunition measured in hundreds of thousands of rounds, body armor, night vision equipment, communications gear, everything needed to outfit a small army. But the discovery got worse. In a corner of the expanded space were wooden crates marked with military explosive handling symbols. The EOD specialists were called forward immediately. The crates were examined using portable X-ray equipment. The contents were confirmed. Plastic explosives, military grade. Enough to level the entire building and cause catastrophic damage to the surrounding neighborhood. The tactical commander made an immediate decision. Civilian evacuation. The apartment buildings within 200 yards were cleared. Police went door to door. This is an emergency evacuation. You need to leave immediately. Take essential items only. Move to the designated shelter location. Do not delay. Over 300 families were evacuated within 40 minutes. Residents moved quickly. Most had children and understood the seriousness when officers said there was an explosive threat. Emergency shelters at a community center and school gymnasium filled with displaced families. The neighborhood was emptied of civilians. Meanwhile, EOD specialists worked to stabilize the explosives. The crates were examined carefully. Some contained stable materials that posed minimal immediate risk, but others showed signs of deterioration. Military explosives had shelf lives. These had been stored improperly for months. Temperature fluctuations in the storage unit, despite climate control, had begun degradation process that made the materials unpredictable. The specialists worked methodically. Each crate was assessed. Stable materials were documented and left in place for later removal. Unstable materials required immediate intervention. Specialized containment vessels were brought in. The most dangerous items were carefully transferred to blast-resistant transport containers for movement to a secure disposal site. The process took hours. The tactical teams maintained security perimeter. Federal investigators documented everything. Photographers captured the scale, the rows of weapons, the ammunition stockpiles, the military equipment that had been systematically stolen and stockpiled in a residential storage facility. Computer equipment found in the makeshift warehouse provided critical intelligence. Inventory lists, transaction records, communications with buyers. The weapons cache was scheduled for transfer in 6 hours. A truck was supposed to arrive that afternoon. The entire arsenal was to be loaded and transported to a port facility for international shipping. Client communications revealed the destination, a designated terrorist organization operating in a conflict zone. The weapons weren't for general arms market resale. They were specifically procured for a group responsible for attacks against civilian populations. The rifles would be used in massacres. The explosives would become vehicle bombs and suicide vests. The anti-aircraft weapons would target humanitarian flights. The financial records showed the scale. The operation had been running for 14 months. Total inventory stolen exceeded 2,400 weapons plus explosives and equipment. Market value was estimated at $12 million. But the real cost would be measured in lives. How many people would die from weapons stolen from American military stockpiles and sold to terrorists? Further investigation of the facility revealed the method. The storage unit expansion had been done illegally. Walls between units were removed during overnight operations. The work was disguised as legitimate maintenance. Building inspectors had never been notified. The structural modifications were hidden behind false walls that appeared to be the original unit boundaries. The criminal network's sophistication was evident. Military insiders provided access to theft targets. The storage facility employee provided secure warehousing. Transportation specialists handled logistics. Financial operatives managed payments and money laundering. The operation required coordination across multiple criminal specialties. 3 suspects were arrested on site. Individuals who had been sleeping in a concealed office area within the warehouse space, serving as security for the weapons cache. All were former military personnel. All had access and knowledge that facilitated the theft operation. Their arrests provided immediate cooperation opportunities. Under interrogation, one began providing information. Names of military personnel involved in diverting weapons, locations of other storage sites, details about the planned transfer and the buyer's representatives. The intelligence was time-sensitive and actionable. Additional raids were coordinated. 4 military personnel were arrested at their duty stations within hours. 2 other storage locations were secured in different cities. Both contained smaller weapons caches, but together they added another 800 stolen firearms to the recovery total. The buyer's representatives were identified through the captured communications. Federal agents coordinated with international partners. When the buyers arrived at the airport expecting to complete the transaction, they were arrested on terrorism-related charges. Their extradition to face trial was arranged through diplomatic channels. The weapons recovery was unprecedented. Over 3,000 firearms, military explosives, equipment worth millions, all stolen from American military installations through an insider operation and stockpiled in a residential neighborhood where any accident could have killed hundreds. The families evacuated from the surrounding area were allowed to return after EOD specialists cleared the facility. The most dangerous explosives had been removed. The remaining weapons were being cataloged for evidence and eventual return to military control. The threat was eliminated. But the proximity of the danger shook the community. A storage facility they passed daily. An unremarkable building in their neighborhood. Behind its walls was an arsenal and explosives that could have devastated their homes. If the criminal network had decided to destroy evidence rather than allow seizure, the explosion would have been catastrophic. The investigation expanded into military supply chain security. How had so many weapons been diverted without detection? The answer revealed systemic vulnerabilities. Inventory systems relied on periodic counts. Replacements with non-functional replicas delayed discovery. Security protocols assumed threats were external, not internal. The insider access allowed systematic theft over extended periods. Reforms were implemented. Enhanced inventory tracking, random inspections, tamper-evident seals on weapons storage, background checks expanded for personnel with access to armories. The case became a catalyst for military security improvements. Federal prosecutions moved forward. The arrested individuals faced charges including theft of government property, illegal weapons trafficking, conspiracy to provide material support to terrorism, and explosives violations. The military personnel involved faced additional court-martial proceedings. Sentences ranged from 15 to 35 years. But the real victory was prevention. The weapons never reached the buyers. The transfer never occurred. The arsenal that would have armed terrorists was seized and secured. The explosives that would have become bombs were safely disposed of. The operation was stopped 6 hours before completion. 6 hours. The transfer was scheduled for afternoon. The truck was arranged. The buyers were traveling to the meeting point. Everything was ready. If the raid had been delayed even slightly, the weapons would have been gone. 3,000 firearms would have disappeared into international arms trafficking networks. The explosives would have been shipped to conflict zones. The death toll from those weapons would have continued for years. Instead, the tactical teams breached the storage facility at dawn. The warehouse was discovered. The explosives were secured. The civilians were evacuated, and the arsenal was seized before transfer. The storage facility remained closed for 3 months during evidence processing and structural repairs. The illegal modifications were corrected. The units were restored to original configurations. Security was enhanced to prevent future criminal use. The facility eventually reopened under new management with strict oversight protocols. The neighborhood carried the memory of the evacuation. 300 families told to leave immediately. Children confused and frightened. Parents worried about what threat required such urgency. The revelation that weapons and explosives had been stored in their community for months created lasting concern about what else might be hidden in plain sight. But they also remembered that law enforcement had acted to protect them. The evacuation was swift and organized. The threat was eliminated before anyone was harmed. The operation prioritized civilian safety above all other considerations. For the tactical teams, the case represented complex challenges successfully met. Urban environment requiring civilian evacuation. Explosive hazards requiring specialized response. International terrorism implications requiring multi-agency coordination. Time-sensitive intelligence demanding rapid execution. All elements were managed effectively. The warehouse behind the false wall remained the defining image. Rows of weapons stretching into darkness, military equipment stolen from American installations, explosives capable of mass destruction, all stored in a residential neighborhood, surrounded by families who had no idea of the danger nearby. The SWAT teams had entered expecting a weapons cache. They found an arsenal. They expected theft evidence. They found a terrorism supply operation. They expected dozens of weapons. They found thousands. The scale transformed the operation from a recovery raid into a counter-terrorism success. The weapons would have armed groups responsible for atrocities. The explosives would have killed civilians in markets and gatherings. The equipment would have made terrorist operations more effective and deadly. All of it was stopped 6 hours before transfer. In a residential neighborhood where the storage facility looked like any other, where families lived their lives unaware that weapons of war were stockpiled 50 yards from their children's bedrooms. The raid secured the facility. The weapons were seized. The suspects were arrested. The buyers were captured. And 300 families who had been evacuated learned why. Their neighborhood had been hosting an arsenal intended for terrorists, and law enforcement had discovered it just in time to prevent both the transfer and the danger that stockpile represented to everyone living nearby. The storage facility raid became a case study. How military weapons are diverted. How residential areas can hide criminal operations. How civilian safety must drive tactical decisions. How insider threats require enhanced security. How international terrorism relies on supply networks that can be disrupted through aggressive investigation and timely action. But the simple truth was clearest. Over 2,000 weapons, military explosives, 6 hours from transfer, 50 yards from apartment buildings, in a neighborhood where families believed they were safe. The SWAT teams made sure they were. The door was breached. The warehouse was discovered. The arsenal was seized. The civilians were protected. And the weapons that would have killed thousands in conflict zones never left the storage facility that had hidden them in plain sight for 11 months.